Break the wheel. Make it stop.
Hello again, gentle viewers, and welcome back to The Broken Wheel. The Seanchan suddenly appeared at the end of Season 1 of The Wheel of Time and are prominent throughout Season 2. Where did they come from, and what are their goals? To answer that, we must first go back 1,000 years to the time of Artur Hawkwing. He has been mentioned a couple of times in the series, and we see him in the last episode of Season 2 as one of the heroes of the Horn. Okay, but what is his connection to the Seanchan, you ask? Excellent question. As always, I'm not the best at pronouncing certain things or certain words, so I will be doing my best to say them correctly, and I'll put them up so that you understand what I'm trying to say. But with all that said, let our journey begin again. Robert Jordan described Artur Hawkwing as tall, with a hooked nose and dark, deep-set eyes. His standard was a golden eagle in flight with lightning bolts shooting from its talons. He also wielded an ancient power-wrought sword named Justice. The man that would become known as the Hawkwing was born Artur Pendrag Tanriel in the year 912 of the Free Years, or FY, roughly 1,000 years before the start of the series. He was the royal prince of the then kingdom of Shandeli, the only known son of King Myrddin Pendrag Mergor and Queen Melinde Pendrag Lindal. Much of the history of this time is lost due to the chaos of later years. We know that Shandeli was a relatively small kingdom compared to its neighbors to the east and west. As such, the Shandeli royal family made sure that the military was well trained and competently led to compensate for their lack of numbers. Artur was schooled from an early age in the arts of warfare to prepare him for his future role in military leadership. To that end, he became a captain in the Shandeli army of some renown before he ever became king. Artur would marry his first wife, Amaline Tagora, in the year 937 FY at the age of 25. Nothing else is known about Amaline or where she was born. 2 years after their marriage, both of Artur's parents would die to a plague that swept through the continent known as the Black Fever. Artur and Amaline became king and queen that same year. Later that year, the false dragon Guer Amalasan would declare himself the Dragon Reborn. Guer turned out not only to be a powerful channeler, but highly charismatic and an effective military leader, so much so of the latter that he was regarded as one of the great captains of his day. Taking advantage of the chaos that followed the Black Fever, Guer was able to gather a large following that he would name the Children of the Dragon. His personal banner was the old symbol of the Aes Sedai on a field of blue. Within 6 months, Guer would take control of his home kingdom of Darmovan in the west. Within a year, he would also take control of the kingdom of Elan Dapur and Balasun to the south. The next 3 years saw Guer's numbers swell into the tens of thousands as he continued to conquer more of the surrounding territories. Knowing the prophecies of the dragon, Guer knew that the fall of the palace fortress, the Stone of Tyr, was one of the events that would herald the dragon's return. He turned his army east towards the city of Tyr, gaining followers and kingdoms along the way. The Aes Sedai declared Guer Amalasan a false dragon and organized armies to be sent against him. All of these forces were defeated except for those led by the young king of Shandeli. Artur's leadership and the swiftness his army could move allowed him to either fight Guer to a stalemate or escape. By the year 942 FY, Artur would become known as the Hawkwing for his use of speed in battle. The siege of the Stone of Tyr proved unsuccessful, and Guer decided to move his forces north while continuing the siege. In the spring of 943 FY, nearly a third of the Westlands was under the false dragon's control, causing rioting in lands that were not. Artur, now called Artur Hawkwing, would face Guer Amalasan that same year, unexpectedly, at the Battle of the Jolvang Pass. Artur Hawkwing led a coalition army of 23,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and an unknown number of Aes Sedai. They were moving south through the Marasid Mountains across the Jolvang Pass. Artur and Guerre's scouts stumbled into one another, and both sides deployed for battle. Guerre Amalassan had a force of 41,000 infantry and 26,000 horses. While he had the advantage of numbers, the terrain did not favor the use of cavalry, so Guerre decided to dismount much of his horsemen. The battle would initially go in favor of the Children of the Dragon, but Hawkwing's signature speed prevented the coalition from being encircled and were able to fall back into the pass. Guerre decided not to pursue so that his army could rest for an assault in the morning. Artur proposed a daring plan for a nighttime counteroffensive, even though his forces were few and tired from a day of fighting. The cavalry, along with the Aes Sedai, would ride around the false dragon forces for over 50 miles into the enemy's rear. At the same time, 2 wings of infantry would strike at the flanks. Guerre's army collapsed into a panic at the 3-pronged attack until he came out into the field himself to rally his forces. Hawkwing and the Aes Sedai charged the false dragon's position, allowing the Aes Sedai to shield him from the one power. With their leader captured, the Children of the Dragon broke and ran. The coalition army were unable to pursue, so most of Guerre's followers escaped. Artur would head north to Tar Valon to deliver Guerre Amalassan to justice. This took him through his home kingdom of Chandeli, where he may have gained reinforcements. When Hawkwing entered Tar Valon territory with an army, he unknowingly broke a long-standing law that no army not under the control of Tar Valon may enter its lands without first gaining permission. History is divided over whether or not the Aes Sedai within the army had given Artur permission. It is known that those Aes Sedai were punished upon returning to the tower. When the army was within sight of Tar Valon's eastern gate and made camp, they received a cold welcome. The Armelin seat, Bonwin Merengden of the Red Aja, gave Artur 5 days to rest his army and then leave. Those forces that were still loyal to the false dragon soon learned of Guerre's capture and moved to free him. 2 of his lieutenants, General Salwin Makulhin and Ilinde Mathinios, gathered an army of over 100,000 men from other battlefronts and launched a surprise attack on Tar Valon from the west. After Guerre's forces captured the western bridges and entered the city, the Armelin seat had no choice but to ask Artur Hawkwing and his army for aid. The battle for Tar Valon, as it would become known, was a bitter street-to-street fight that would cost the attackers a high price in blood for every foot of ground gained. When General Makulhin was killed, the remaining army broke and was put to rout. Mathinios would also be slain, but the when and where are unknown. With Guerre Amalassan gentled and his forces destroyed by Artur Hawkwing, the war that would become known as the War of the Second Dragon would come to an end. Although Artur Hawkwing had saved Tar Valon, the Amerlin seat was not grateful to him in the slightest. It is unknown what was said between the two in the aftermath of the Battle of Tar Valon. It is known that the two parted in anger, and Artur immediately led his army south for home. Chandeli's neighboring kingdoms accused Hawkwing of subverting attempts to restore order in the nations the false dragon had conquered. They claimed that Artur wanted to use the chaos in these leaderless kingdoms to expand his own power. Soon after, they would launch a 3-pronged invasion of Chandeli. Artur is noted to have believed that the Amerlin seat and the White Tower were responsible for starting these rumors and encouraging the attack. The following series of wars would become known as the Consolidation. Even though he was badly outnumbered, Hawkwing would use his trademark swift tactics to defeat each attacking force. He quickly raised reinforcements and launched counterattacks into each of the three neighboring nations that saw Hawkwing make significant gains into each kingdom within 3 weeks. Though each enemy would receive reinforcements from other kingdoms the following year, Artur would defeat them as well. He would consolidate the territory he had gained and expand his army with men from the nations he had conquered, many of whom gladly joined, for Hawkwing was known to treat his soldiers well and grant promotions based on merit rather than birthright. The consolidation would continue for 19 years, despite being mostly fought defensively. Armies would continue to attack but be driven back as Artur Hawkwing would use the times between battles to reinforce and fortify. In the year 963 FY, the final battle against King Jol Remandar of Aldashar would see the wars come to an end. Artur Pendrag Tangriel would be crowned High King, controlling all the Westlands with the exception of those lands controlled by Tar-Valon. However, this victory would come at a heavy price. In the year 942 FY, Artur's wife Amaline would give birth to twins, Amira and Modair. She would also give birth to 2 other children, but their names are not known. Modair would die in battle during the consolidation in 959 FY. In 961 FY, Amaline and her 3 children would be killed by poisoning. Artur Tangriel went into a legendary rage upon hearing of the death of his family. As the 4-year war against King Rimdar reached its closing, Artur refused to accept the surrender of several generals. He instead ordered their armies massacred, causing the Aes Sedai advisor to leave his service in protest. This would mark the beginning of the black years of his reign, where he would become ruthless and even cruel. The High King launched an invasion of the Aiel Waste the following year of 964 FY. This campaign proved to be poorly planned as the Aiel would not face Hawkwing in open battle. They chose to harry his flanks and raid his supply lines, the latter proving to be the most damaging as Artur's men were unused to the harsh conditions in the waste. His advance crawled to a halt as his army did not know how to find food or water and were rapidly succumbing to the heat. After several months, Artur ordered his forces to retreat, suffering the greatest and only defeat of his life. After returning home in the later part of 964 FY, the High King would meet his second wife, Tamika. In spite of being 30 years younger than Artur Hawkwing, they fell in love and were married a year later. Tamika was able to calm the rage that had overtaken Artur, bringing an end to the Black Years. It is believed that her influence helped repair relations between the High King and Tar-Valon, allowing for Aes Sedai to once again be welcome in Artur's court. The Westlands would see a time of relative peace for the next 20 years. Save for 7 rebellions that were quickly suppressed, this was a time of great prosperity. Travel was made safe so that trade could flourish. Great works of art and public works were created. New cities were founded and destroyed ones were rebuilt. Tamika would give birth to her and Artur's first child sometime in the first few years of their marriage, a daughter named Lewin Pendrag. Their eldest son would be born in 967 FY, named Luther Pendrag Modwin. History records that they had 2 or 3 other children, but their stories and names are lost to time. In 973 FY, a strange man named Jalwin Morad would enter the High King's court. Within a year, Jalwin would rise to become one of Artur Hawkwing's highest counselors. Many believed this man to be mad and greatly distrusted him, including Artur's wife Tamika. Jalwin was known to have a violent temper, and any that attempted to gather information about him would soon be found dead. Jalwin Marad openly despised Aes Sedai, and in 974 FY, he convinced the High King to dismiss all Aes Sedai from their positions inside the Empire. Jalwin then had bounties placed on the head of any Aes Sedai that would not renounce the White Tower. Artur Hawkwing would lay siege to Tar-Valon in 975 FY after Jalwin convinced the High King that it was the Aes Sedai who had arrange the deaths of his first family. The siege would last until 994 FY, even after Artur's old nemesis, Bonwin Merignan, was deposed as the Armelin seat. In 986 FY, a large force of Shadowspawn invaded the borderlands in 3 separate assaults. The Shadow believed that the High King, now 74 years old, would be unable to respond with his usual swiftness due to his advanced years. This proved incorrect, as Artur Hawkwing quickly assembled a new army, while having outposts in the borderland establish a campaign of delaying tactics. The following 7 major battles would prove successful in funneling the Dark One's armies to the fields of Talendar. In what would become known as the Battle of Talendar, Artur Hawkwing would utterly destroy the Shadowspawn in a massive engagement. The Shadowspawn were so thoroughly defeated that the borderlands would see a calm across the Blight border that lasted 50 years. Being reinvigorated by the war with the Shadowspawn, the High King was thirsty for new conquests. He ordered 2 great fleets constructed, each comprising of over 2,000 ships. Each fleet would carry 300,000 soldiers and settlers, with one sailing east and the other west. The eastern fleet would sail to Shara, the lands east of the Aiel Waste. The western would cross the Arith Ocean to whatever may lay beyond. The western fleet would set out in the year 992 FY under the command of Artur's son Luther. This fleet would reach the northeastern shores of the continent of Seanchan. A society in the city of Falm was founded to facilitate communication between Luther's fleet and the High King. Named the Watchers over the Waves, or Domir Avran, they would construct many watchtowers along the coast of Toman Head. Contact with Luther's fleet would be lost, but the Watchers would continue their vigil over the centuries, waiting for the fleet's return. That same year, Bonwin Merignan would be deposed as Armelin's seat after evidence was found that she had manipulated Artur Hawkwing for her own personal agenda. Her predecessor would attempt to convince the High King to lift the siege of Tar-Valon, but to no avail. In the following year of 993 FY, the Eastern Fleet would launch for Shara under the command of one of Artur Hawkwing's daughters, whose name is not known. Little history remains of what exactly happened to this fleet. The sea folk record that the fleet did land on the western and southern shores of Shara. Though the invading forces seem to have made some initial gains inland, their ships would be recorded as burning at anchor. The ultimate fate of the army is unknown, and all traders from Shara deny that the event ever happened. The High King's only remaining child, Leywind, would die under suspicious circumstances in the year 994 FY. Her son and Artur Hawkwing's heir, Tirn Sir Pendrag Mashara, would also disappear. A few days later, Artur Pendrag Tangriel would fall ill and pass away with no heir to his empire. This power vacuum would trigger a series of wars for power known as War of the 100 Years. There appear to be 2 main parallels for the character of Artur Hawkwing, those being Alexander the Great and King Arthur, the latter being a unifier of lands and wielding an enchanted sword and having a similar name of Arthur Pendragon, the former being a great conqueror and having their empire fall apart after his death. In the final episode of the 2nd season of the TV series, we see Artur Hawkwing summoned back to life as one of the heroes of the Horn after Matt blows the horn of Valir. He is played by Adrian Bouchette. So if you've made it all the way through this video, thank you for sticking it out to the end. In the next part of this series, I'll be going into what happened to Luther's fleet and how they would conquer the continent of Seanchan. So please consider leaving a like and a comment below. And thank you for watching. And as always, may you walk in the light.